Professor Liu Baocheng here with us in the Beijing studio. He's coming from the University of International Business and Economics. Sir, welcome to our program. Meanwhile, we have in New York Mr. Benjamin Wei, CEO and member of the Executive Committee of New York Global Group. Welcome. And in Tokyo, we have Professor Yorizumi Watanabe from Keio University. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. First of all, let's take a look at this, because over the Chinese Spring Festival holiday or the Lunar New Year, there are a lot of Chinese tourists that are snapping up Japanese goods while they're traveling to Japan. According to a local television channel in Japan, as many as 450,000 Chinese flew to Japan during the holiday, spending nearly $1 billion of goods over there. Chinese consumers really were clearing out shelves, buying huge numbers of electronic rice cookers, air purifiers, digital cameras, and most notably, interestingly, electronic toilet seats. Look at that. Many would wonder what other Chinese consumers are doing in Japan. Maybe you can help us to explain this, Professor Liu. Why toilet seats? Why these kinds of small electronic products? You don't have that in China?
Well, we have that in terms of function, but in terms of how savvy they are, we are unable to compete by made in China with what is being made in Japan. And they are lightweight and they are fancy, and quality warranty is more or less stable. Than
wait, Professor, yes. Because as far as I know, there's one interesting story going on online. They buy these electronic toilet seat in Japan, and they have a photo with that specific electronic toilet seat just to show to their friends that I've got one. But actually, they later found out many of these products were made in China, made specifically in the city of Hangzhou. So it seems very weird that the Chinese are traveling around the world just to buy back products that's already made in their hometown. What is going on? Help us to understand.
It is even an irony, because they are made in China, but they are not designed in China. They are not marketed by Chinese firms. And so therefore, in this way, China is left in the middle by offering the cheap labor and even environmental cost to process the product. So therefore, the creativity and novelty are not in the hands of Chinese, and at the market end, the brand does not belong to China.
We should invite Professor Watanabe in here, because, of course, this is a joke, already on Chinese internet chat rooms. It's not necessarily really that the Chinese tourists are going to Japan, everybody got a toilet seat, but rather it is an interesting story that reflects the reality. Professor Watanabe, what do you think of the current stage of China's manufacturing? How sophisticated is it? Have you seen a stage in Japan's history that's similar to what China is experiencing right now?
Well, China is going through kind of steps which are quite inevitable for any country on the way of industrial development. I think, Japan started from textile industries in the 1950s, and the comparative advantage has moved from Japan to, say, Korea or Taiwan or to China. And you see, if you look at those development, one after another, say, from textile to ball bearings or steel or shipbuilding or car manufacturing, the comparative advantage has been rolling on and off from one country to another. And China is just experiencing that kind of inevitable path for industrial development.
I see.
So what China should do is maybe, allocate the resource that it has in China to the other sectors where China could have future comparative advantage.
Easier said than done, isn't it, Mr. Wei? I mean, it has a lot to do with the speed that China is really catching up on the so-called high-end manufacturing. Is it really happening from your observation?
Yes,
well,
indeed.
A very
For
interesting
instance,
point.
Dr. Wei, please. Dr. Wei, please.
Okay, sure.
Great. Thank you. You really raised a very interesting point, which is what's really driving the Chinese economy and what are some of the factors in terms of the transforming the economy after 30 years, 40 years of economic growth. I've been a banker and a private investor and a financier on Wall Street for almost 20 years. I tell you I'm quite a bit worried at this point because we're not really seeing productivity increasing as rapidly as the government and leaders like to see. We're not really seeing efficiency is there. We're really not seeing a lot of a capital inflow instead of outflowing. There are really a lot of issues in the economy in China that we have not experienced in the last 40 years. So the question is, what are the solutions? What are people trying to do? We're a Wall Street people. I can tell you, people are looking for realistic solutions. I'm not really worried about at all what type of toilet seats people are buying from Japan. I don't have those fancy toilet seats. So the issue is innovation going to drive China? Is efficiency going to drive China? Is it productivity? These are some of the things that we've got to really look at closely.
But probably I'm talking about even more specific issue, that is the high-end manufacturing, because China has always been, Mr. Wei, and a factory of the world over the past, let's just say 30 years for opening up and reform. But now it seems China is losing that as a result of the rise of the labor costs, while at the same time not necessarily catching up yet with those that are well known for its high-end manufacturing, such as Japan or Germany, even now today's United States. So which stage is China at? What do you think is the most critical thing that's facing China right now in that regard? I'm not talking about the general economy. I'm focusing on this specific issue, sir.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. How can you really transform a lot of the low-paying jobs and low productivity jobs into something that garner much higher wages? It's very difficult. Innovation has to come in. Better economic environment has to play a very significant role. It's really not a quick solution, quick answers. I tell you, we speak to Fortune 500 companies on Wall Street all the time. Our observations are very simple. People are worried about their global economy, worried about the Chinese domestic market, worried about European markets. When people are worried, they simply are not buying. If they're not buying, they're not simply